Ladies and gentlemen, it's the prodigious, the Professor at Proclamation News and Garance on the module of DD 103. My academic integrity is arts and humanities. Reading every day, investigating the social world too. Farmers in less developed countries producing commodities like coffee, tea and sugar are in a precarious position. They are subject to fluctuating prices, which makes it difficult to be certain they will receive a price that is high enough to meet their basic costs. They participate in global trading systems that is weighed in favour of large corporations, looking for low prices in countries that can afford to pay their farmers subsidies or payments to continue growing their crops. On top of this, weather conditions are becoming more unpredictable, making it difficult for one farmer to grow and sustain their crops. The plight of the farmers in the developing world is the subject of public debate, and it provokes suggestions about different ways to help those reliant on agriculture commodities to stabilise their income and improve their standard of living. In this chapter, you will evaluate such suggestions of fair trade, a market intervention and consumer movement that is attempting to address trade injustices. The fair trade model was developed to alleviate poverty in developing countries by helping the producers to improve their living and working conditions by paying them a fair price for their crops. Prices fall very low. It relies on consumers, usually in the West, choosing products that carry the fair trade label. Page 207. Fair trade, bridging boundaries, which may or may not be more expensive than non-fair trade alternatives. Choose a different brand of coffee or chocolate. It is seductive, but does it work? Box 10.1. Fair trade or fair trade. There are different meanings attached to different ways of writing fair trade, and you'll see all below in this chapter. Fair trade. When the fair trade is written as two words without capital letters, it refers to the wider fair trade movement. This encompasses the labelled and non-labelled products, as well as the wider movement seeking to secure trade justice for the world's poorest producers. Fair trade. When fair trade is capitalised and written as one word, it refers to fair trade labelled goods and the town cities movement in the UK and Europe. Fair trade. When fair trade is capitalised and written as two words, it refers to the labelled fair trade products certified in the United States by Fair Trade USA and organisations certified by the Fair Trade Federation, as well as the Fair Trade Towns movement in the United States. In this chapter, you'll be asked to consider a set of debates that question how effective fair trade is at helping producers and raising awareness amongst consumers. Like most social problems, how to promote trade justice and encourage consumers to make alternative choices has no easy solution, and different people can have very different ideas about the best way to resolve the same problem. Indeed, in the last chapter, you were introduced to the concepts of zoning and individualisation as ways of managing conflicts around noise. Attempts to regulate or govern this controversial social problem have varying success because of the different values, norms and beliefs of various individuals and groups. Social scientists often have to evaluate a range of opinions and perspectives in order to get a better understanding of social issues. This chapter will develop the valuable skill of using social science evidence to evaluate claims. Social scientists regularly interrogate the claims of different organisations, drawing on research evidence to inform their position. You will learn that evidence is open to different interpretations and views. Learning to use this evidence critically and to communicate your findings to a wider audience is as vital tool for any social scientist or group. Material presented throughout this chapter utilises the theme of justice, specifically trade justice. You'll learn how there are pathways to trade justice, with the factors and social relations, such as whether you consider the consequences of fair trade for just one community, or to try and widen your analysis to a globalness of bridge with fair trade consumption, opens the possibility for using the sphere of shopping to realise the goal of trade justice. Through the course of this chapter, you will realise that these boundaries are never fixed and are made and remade through our interventions in the social world. In this chapter, you will introduce the claims of fair trade movement and debates about its efficiency. Develop your skills in drawing on social science evidence to interrogate claims and engage in debate. Use the theme of justice to help you evaluate the effectiveness of fair trade for producers and consumers. Question how far the boundaries between the consumers and the systems have been bridged. This chapter has two main sections that deal with either side of the fair trade relationship, production and consumption. Section 1, Fair Trade and Alternative Pathways in Trade Justice presents an overview of the fair trade scheme that claims to help farmers, more commonly referred to as producers. In the developing world, it's also introduced as opposing position that fair trade does not help farmers. Section 2, Consumer Citizenship looks at the claims that fair trade empowers consumers to act as global citizens and presents an alternative position for you to critique. Fair trade and alternative pathways to trade justice. Many farmers in the developing world grow agricultural products that they can sell on international exchange markets, rather than crops that they consume themselves. They are known as cash crops and include coffee, cocoa, and cotton. Some farms may include to grow these crops because it is a lucrative business model, while others may have grown the crops for centuries as a way of life that has been passed down through generations. Income from the export of goods is crucial for Iceland's development within poorer parts of the world. If you look at figure 12 below, which shows the total trade of goods divided by the population size, you should notice that the countries that have the highest trade income and their countries that are the most developed. Page 312, Chapter 10, Fair Trade, Bridging Boundaries. Giving producers fairer access to international trading markets is a goal of many international development agencies because it can provide a route of poverty by increasing trade income. However, despite the giants it can bring, achieving this goal has not been easy because of a number of factors, including poor local infrastructure like roads, lack of awareness of international exchange markets in poor remote regions of the world, and the imposition of tariffs on all imports, which makes it difficult for foreign producers to compete in a given market. The World Trade Organization, WTO, has called on its members to end tariffs and subsidize except in limited situations. However, the requirement has not fulfilled because international trade is an incredibly complex arena in which different actors compete in pursuit of their own interests. This section explores some of the claims made of the fair trade movement about its work with producers developing worlds. It presents some counter-arguments about the fair trade model made by Adam Smith Institute. In this debate, you'll see how different institutions can have very different perspectives about the best ways to achieve trade justice. You also learn how social scientists can participate in this debate, providing evidence in support of these different perspectives. Trade justice. The theme of justice. What is considered fair or equitable in relation to rights, rewards, resources, punishments, and sanctions within society is highly relevant to discussions in this chapter. Trade justice sees trade as fundamental to the goal of realising a fair distribution of wealth and resources between agencies, governments, and non-government organisations around the world that recognise the importance of opening up trade and making it fairer for all. The turn of the century, United Nations Development 8 Key Millennium Development Goals, MDG, with the aim to reducing poverty and increasing equality. A key platform of the 8th MDG called the further development of an open, rule-based, predictable, non-discriminatory trading and financial system, United Nations. 1.1 Fair Trade, its aims and mechanisms. Although fair trade activities can be treated back in the 1940s, the movement really took off in the 1990s. Coffee prices had fallen to their lowest point in over 100 years after an international system to stabilise prices was disbanded in 1989 and following a frost in Brazil, which initially increased the price of coffee. However, a situation of oversupply soon developed. The coffee crisis devastated coffee farmers across the globe, causing poverty, hunger, and migration to cities. Meanwhile, in the Netherlands, the first fair trade label coffee, the Max Havelaar label, was introduced into the Dutch supermarkets in 1988. This initiative offers a small number of coffee farmers from Mexico the opportunity to access a fairer price for their crop in return for their cooperative meeting certain standards, such as demographic structure and no discrimination on the basis of sex, race, or religion. That were independently certified, unlike earlier fair trade initiatives, whose products had mainly been distributed via alternative channels, such as church halls, specialist catalogues, or wealth shops. The Max Havelaar label pioneered the mainstream distribution of fair trade products. It was a trend soon replicated across Europe and North America, with coffee being the flagship fair trade product in most countries, guaranteeing coffee farmers a fair price at the time when they were really struggling, was a popular intervention that many development agencies and charities supported. As the movement developed, an overarching organisation was established, the Fair Trade Labelling Organisation, FLO, to bring together all the international initiatives behind universal fair trade standards and to create a single fair trade mark. To be certified as fair trade, there are certain standards that yet to be met. And these will vary slightly depending upon the type of product and organisation. When fair trade certification began, it focused on small-scale coffee farmers organised into cooperatives. The standards are evolving over time in cooperative large plantations with hired labourers, like just for certain crops such as bananas and tea, which are grown only on plantations. Decisions to allow only these plantations to become fair trade certified as provided controversial and in 2011. Fair Trade USA left the FLO because it wanted to work with both small-scale coffee farmers and coffee plantations, some of fair trade standards. Producers must be guaranteed a minimum price for their product which is able to cover the cost of its sustainable production. In the current market price is higher than this minimum price. The producer should receive the higher of the two prices. Producers are paid an additional social premium which they must invest into community development projects. Producers should democratically decide how the premium will be spent. The types of projects it has funded are social schools, healthcare facilities, toilets and water pumps. Importers of fair trade goods need to offer producers pre-finance of up to 60% of their purchase value of seasonal crops, which is crucial for paying cooperative members when they deliver their harvest. Long-term trading relationships between producers and traders are essential to help producers to plan their development and invest in their farms. Producers have to demonstrate they meet specific economic, environmental and social requirements such as a democratic body to make decisions about the use of fair trade premium and to share profits equally. Sound environmental management of crops, including no genetically modified organisms and limited use of pesticides, fair labour conditions such as no forced or child labour. When consumers buy products labelled with a fair trade mark, they are promised that these products have been produced and exchanged according to the standards listed in box 10.3, of course. This assurance involves a need for auditing and checks, which are provided by an independent arm of Fair Trade Labelling Organisation, FLO. Called FLO Cert, both producers and importers have to pay fees to be certified by this organisation and to have access to the Fair Trade Scheme. A key element of Fair Trade Movement's approach is to empower producers to improve their lives for themselves. rather than relying on handouts for international aid and charitable donations. Around 1.2 million workers and farmers in 58 developing countries benefit from fair trade (FLO). By giving these producers the tools to participate in the global system, FLO maintains that fair trade offers alternative approach to conventional trade based on partnership between producers and consumers. When farmers can sell on fair trade terms, it provides with a better deal and improved terms of trade. This allows them to opportunities to improve their lives and plan for their future. I don't know if any of you that work in a farming industry or maybe in a factory. They do wheat and barley. But, it makes sense, doesn't it? It all makes sense. Here we go. Page 316. Fair trade, bridging boundaries, improving terms of trade. This allows them the opportunity to improve their lives and plan for their future. Before moving on, consider how 2 points. How do you think workers benefit from the fair trade system? Identify one barrier that might prevent a farmer from becoming fair trade certified. Benefits of fair trade system include a minimum price that covers the cost of production, long-term trade partnerships that enable producers to plan and develop their business, access to training and technical assistance, access to credit, opportunities to invest in local infrastructure and community developing projects, which in turn can lead to better healthcare and education. A barrier to becoming a fair trade certified farmer is the certification fees that must be paid to the FLO cert to cover the cost of auditing. This can be prohibitive, especially in the light of many criteria producers must fulfill before they can be considered eligible as fair trade producers. Another barrier is that the system is only open to small-scale or cooperative producers in crops like coffee and cocoa, meaning that labourers working on these crops on plantations are not eligible for the scheme. 1.2 Free trade is fair trade. Fair trade has become a well-known and well-supported movement, with retailers, central government, local authorities, schools, faith groups and development charities promoting it and championing the label in the UK. However, according to the Adam Smith Institute, fair trade does little to aid economic development, and it is not the most effective means of promoting trade justice. Rather than they maintain that free trade is the most effective poverty reduction strategy in the world has ever seen. Since World 2008. As you remember from the chapter putting a price on a common resource, the concept of free trade is often attributed to Smith, whose ideas informed the voice of Hayek. Hayek believed that intervening in the market is counterproductive because the greatest good is achieved when individuals are left alone to pursue their own self-interest. In spite of this, governments across the globe do engage in central management of their economics, with the aim of protecting their country's interests. The most common way is through the imposition of tariffs and barriers, which make it difficult for all services. The Adam Smith Institute is an organisation that is trade, with its fixed minimum price and its removal of consumer choice, is a violation of these principles. Box 10.4 shows a slightly adapted version of the executive summary of a key report written by Mark Simbal from the Adam Smith Institute, released in February 2008. Box 10.4 executive summary of the unfair trade. Fair Trade Fortnight is a marketing exercise intended to maintain a fair trade mark's predominance in an increasingly competitive market for ethically branded products. The hype is necessary because there is every reason for a shrewd consumer to make other choices. Fair trade is unfair. It offers only a very small number of farmers a higher fixed price for their goods. These higher prices come at the expense of the great majority of farmers who, unable to qualify to fair trade certification, are left even worse off. Fair trade does not aid economic development. It operates to keep the poor in their place, sustaining uncompetitive farmers on their land and holding back diversification, mechanisation, and moves up to the value chain. This denies future generations a chance of a better life. Page 318. Everyone on Castbox, thank you so much for listening. Especially you listening on YouTube, Tony, thank you so much. Page 318. Fair trade only helps landowners, not the agricultural labourers who suffer the severest poverty. Indeed, fair trade rules deny labourers and the opportunity of permanent full-time employment. Consumers now has a wide variety of ethical alternatives to fair trade, many of which represent more effective ways to fight poverty, increase the poor standard of living and economic development. Fair trade arose from the coffee crisis of the 1990s. This is not a free market failure. Governments tried to rig the market through the International Coffee Agreement and subsidised overplantation with the encouragement of well-meaning but misguided agencies. The crashing prices were the inevitable result of the government intervention, but coffee prices have largely recovered since then. Free trade is the most effective poverty reduction strategy the world has ever seen. If we really want to aid international development, we should abolish barriers to trade in the rich world and persuade the developing world to do the same. The evidence is clear. Fair trade is unfair, but free trade makes you rich. You will deduce that the Adam Smith Institute makes a number of claims about the fair trade movement, but how can investigative social scientists check whether these are credible? When evaluating claims, it is useful to begin by asking yourself a number of simple questions. What is being said? Is it clear and understandable? And does the line of reasoning seem possible? Why is it being said? Is a new piece of evidence being reported? Or is the claim being made in response or to a particular event, person or organisation? Who is saying it? Does the author have a agenda that they want to communicate? And who to? Bear in mind how the position and values of the author could shape the claims made. Look again at box 10.4 and take a moment to reflect on these three questions: what, why, and who. Don't worry if you can't think of the points each of the questions, because discovering the gaps will be the first step of your evaluation. In this discussion, what other things? The report states that fair trade is unfair because the higher prices are only accessible to a small number of landowning farmers. These higher prices come to expense of the farmers that are fair trade certified or the work of the casual labourers. The coffee crisis was caused by market intervention, and coffee prices have now been risen, showing that free trade, not intervention, is the best way to help farmers in the developing world. Consumers would be better off looking for efficient ways of helping farmers through development. These are not named here. The arguments made seem clear, free from jargon, and the claims may be possible, depending on the evidence for them. This evidence is not viable in the summary of warrants further investigation. Why? The report was released in February 2008 and was timed to coincide with the yearly event on Fair Trade Foundation's calendar, Fair Trade Fortnight. It is aimed at the consuming public and those supportive of the fair trade movement. The Adam Smith Institute has a commitment to free trade, and their arguments are critical with no acknowledgement of any positive benefits of being a fair trade farmer or consumer. By asking these simple questions, it is likely that you'll be noticed that there is a need for further evidence in order to evaluate these claims made. Indeed, in their response to its report, the Fair Trade Foundation questioned the credibility of the evidence drawn upon by Mark Sidwell and said that many of their own producers would contain. Yet again, social scientists may question an anecdotal evidence supplied by successful fair trade farmers who would be unlikely to offer a critical account of their own scheme. Fortunately, research conducted by social scientists can offer more balanced insights to help you to evaluate the claims of both organisations. But as you will see, the picture is far from clear. Does fair trade help? In 2017, the The Development for International Development (DFID) commissioned a group of academics from a School of African and Orientational Studies (SOAS) to undertake the most comprehensive evaluation of fair trade to date. The term of research is focused on both fair trade certified and non-fair trade certified farms in Ethiopia and Uganda across the coffee, tea and cut flowers industries. Why do you think SOAS research evaluated both fair trade and non-fair trade farms and different types of crop? By adopting contrasting cases, it was possible for the researchers to identify key differences between fair trade and non-fair trade farms, enabling them to say something about the difference that being certified made to farmers by looking across different crops. They were also able to explore whether fair trade makes more difference to coffee farmers than flower growers. For example, given the different ways these two commodities are cultivated and processed. The researchers decided to focus on what they considered the most vulnerable group of people working on these farms, casual wage labour, with a particular focus on female workers, who made up the vast majority of casual labourers. You may remember that one of the Sibel's criticisms of fair trade was that it only helped landowners, not to the people who worked as casual labourers on these farms. The researchers surveyed over 17,000 casual labourers and re-surveyed around 400 of these 2 years later to take account of any changes over time. Hundreds of these workers also provide in-depth accounts of their life, work histories, providing rich qualitative insights. The researchers found that fairy tale certification had no positive effect on either wages or working conditions of manual agriculture wage workers. Wage casual labourers appear to do so badly from fair trade because the scheme has consistently overlooked their existence and holds onto a romantic ideology of how cooperatives operate in poor rural areas. For example, certification assumes that farms are family run and ignore the significant need for outsourced casual work wage labour. With fair trade not accounting for their existence, small scale farmers are unable to provide better working conditions. Researchers also reported that female workers, especially those who are divorced or widowed, suffer particularly disadvantages, including lower wages than their male counterparts and regular sexual harassment. This was the case in both the fair trade and the non-fair trade farms, which suggested that there are wider structural inequalities that must be addressed. The SOAS reported highlights an area where fair trade schemes are performing poorly, but that does not necessarily mean that the scheme is not performing better in the areas. In a review of 23 published reports, Nelson and Pound concluded that fair trade provides favourable economic opportunities for smallholder farming families, but that does not always translate into higher incomes and their fair trade neighbours. Indeed, the sociologist free trade sees the market as a key engine of trade justice. The market must be free from state intervention that creates unfair advantages and disadvantages to different actors, such as trade subsidies and tariffs. Vietnam's coffee industry was made possible by intervention from states who provided international subsidies to help these farmers compete in their market. While the fair trade movement calls the consumer-led regulation of the market, another school of thought shown by the coffee industry in Vietnam argues that market ought to be regulated by the state. Free trade advocates like the Adam Smith Institute would disagree with both positions, believing that the market is best left alone to ensure greater trade justice for all. Much of the debate reveals how there are different understandings of the best way to achieve both trade justice and social justice for farmers. In the developing world, there are no simple answers to these questions, and different types of interventions are supported by those with different perspectives about the underlying cause of poverty and routes to development. While the fair trade movement wants farmers to continue farming and earn better living from this, free trade advocates believe that larger structural changes are necessary to increase productivity in farming incomes. Social scientists can contribute to this debate by questioning, analysing, evaluating, and communicating the relative merits of these different interventions, making suggestions for improvements and highlighting that boundaries between what is fair and unfair are fluid and cannot be evaluated in isolation. From the broader social context, what is fair for one group of farmers and workers may create problems for other farmers and workers or for their movement. As a social scientist, it is important to interrogate the assumptions and values that lie behind the claims made about the social world. Both accounts from the fair trade movement and the Adam Smith Institute represent particular value positions. Section 1.3 may have helped you formulate an opinion regarding these claims. The evidence is mixed and often unclear, but you may have recognised there are both some benefits and some problems with the fair trade model, just as there are free trade and state intervention. In a summary, greater trade justice can provide poverty and equality in the developing world, but achieving this goal is incredibly difficult. Fair trade movement claims to help farmers by providing greater income, education, training, farming and trading practice, and active community development. Free trade advocates like Adam Smith Institute disagree with fair trade claims and instead argue that it is unfair. Social science evidence. It helps us to question and evaluate these claims, highlighting both benefits and problems of fair trade schemes and other forms of intervention. Cool. Hope you enjoyed the reading, guys. Page 3 to 9. Fair Trade, Chapter 10, Fair Trade, Bridging Boundaries, Consumer, Citizenship. Consumer Citizenship. Having considered some of these debates around the efficiency of fair trade for producers, we now move on to the other side of fair trade relationships, the consumers. The UK has the biggest market for fair trade goods, with shoppers spending 1.7 billion on fair trade labelled goods in 2013. Both advocates of fair trade movements and some social scientists have argued that growing fair trade sales signal that more and more consumers are using the sphere of consumption to vote trade justice. However, others have argued there are limits to the role that consumers can play through their shopping choices. This section will explore both of these claims. And, like Section 1, we will review how social science evidence can contribute to and inform this debate. It is useful to keep in mind much of this debate rests upon supposed bridging of the boundary between the consumer and the citizens. Consumption and citizenship have traditionally been understood to sit opposite ends of the political spectrum, with the consumer indulging their individual private wants in Activity 5. What different qualities do you associate with consumer and citizenship? Below are some of the qualities usually associated with these two identities. However, you want to consider whether it is really the case that they are so easily separated. For example, think about the last time you went shopping and whether your choices could really be described as individual and selfish, or whether in fact your choices were shaped by your involvement in broader social networks, such as your family or work colleagues, and were in part a response to their wishes, needs. Social historians have argued that the boundaries between the consumer and citizenship have always been blurred and are stitched together in new ways at particular times or places. Regardless of how new or unusual the bridging is, it has been claimed that there is something about contemporary global society that has created the possibility for consumers to step in and use their shopping choices as a form of individualised political action or vote. Is shopping the new politics, and do consumers really think about their shopping in this way? 3.1. The divide of the fair trade citizen to consumer. In Fighting the Banana War, written by then Executive Director of the Fair Trade Foundation, Harriet Lamb states that the beauty of fair trade is, of course, anyone can support it. We can all spend those extra few seconds in the coffee aisle of your local shop. Stick out your hand and suddenly we're part of the solution. Fair trade is an easy action that, she claims, links citizenship in the rich world with farmers and workers in Peru and Burkina Faso and all India. Fair trade is described as a people's movement for change, in which consumers act as citizens by choosing fair trade products. In its vision, the typical fair trade the typical fair trade describes the people's movement for change and consumer citizenship by choosing fair trade products. In this vision, the fair trade consumer is imagined as an ordinary person who thinks carefully about their purchases and they make. And you may have noticed that this account of fair trade consumer transnational corporations and a weakening power of individual nation states. It is now consumers who are imagined to uniquely as nation states. It is uniquely have the power and duty to safeguard both their economic distribution and because consumers have to rely on global marketplace for the provision of goods. Most are forced to trust the retailers and corporations they depend upon for their daily existence. However, this does not leave consumers with little resource to action when they become aware of the bad practices of global corporations. In the face of the consumer's lack of control over the population process, this approach believes that citizens are prompted to take politics in their own hands, creating new arenas for responsibility taking. In an analysis of promotional material developed to encourage consumers to buy fair trade and other ethical consumer goods, Clark concludes that consumers are indeed being called upon to regulate economic institutions to become citizens of the world by virtue of their status as consumers. Consumers are encouraged to reflect upon their position within the system of global exploitation and to their purchases in this global market to act upon their responsibilities. Ethical consumer organisations like the Fair Trade Foundation are tuning the discourse of globalisation, which has traditionally highlighted the dominance of companies over individuals. On its head, now the consumer is the one that returns to debate in section 1. The model that sits behind this line of reasoning is a version of the free market model in which there are free choices to intervene for greater good. In a response to the Adam Smith report, the Fair Trade Foundation defended their approach by stressing this very point. People work extremely hard to earn a living, but still earn less than £2 per day. A fair trade market enables British consumers to choose products that help address this injustice, and no one is forced to join a fair trade producer organisation or buy fair trade products. You would think that free market economists like the Adam Smith Institute would be pleased at the way the British public has taken our voluntary label to its heart, and to the supermarket checkout, to the tune of nearly £500 million worth of goods in 2007 alone. But who are these citizens, consumers, who are taking this label to heart? Do they consider their purchase of fair trade goods as a vote for the fair trade movement? 2.2 Shopping for justice. In their analysis, audience are already interested and have some sympathy with the fair trade movement aim. Fair trade are more likely to view their consumption choices as votes for the fair trade movement than those without an interest in fair trade. My research with self-defined fair trade supporters and people without any real commitment to the movement can provide some insights into this point. I based my research in a fair trade town and conducted focus groups and in-depth interviews with both sets of consumers, fair trade supporters and fair trade supporters. Fair trade supporters were recruited through fair trade town events, whereas non-fair trade supporters respond in local supermarkets to discuss their coffee chocolate routine. Non-fair trade supporters were anti-fair trade, but rather people not actually involved in the fair trade activities. The two groups of consumers were asked how effective they thought shopping choices were at tackling poverty in developing countries. The fair trade supporters gave a number of reasons for buying fair trade products, from wanting to support the small producers to doing one bit acting like a Christian and making themselves feel better, and their shopping choices. Most had attended events where fair trade producers had described how fair trade had helped their community and believed that fair trade is an effective way of making a difference in the developing world. Most fair trade supporters, however, did not imagine themselves as individual consumers, but as a member of a group like-minded people who were doing something together to tackle trade injustice. For Matt, a 67-year-old education consultant, fair trade shopping choices were also viewed as a powerful way of sending a message to transnational corporations. It is not only whether all the contributions in buying fair trade goes to fair trade. That's obviously very important. But I mean, there's also benefit as if I buy a pound of bananas, fair trade bananas, I'm not buying a pound of non-fair trade bananas. So, as this balance of fair trade shifts, uses hands and scales. The fives of the world actually sit up and take notice and say, I mean, this isn't an optimistic view. Hey, hang on a minute, there's something going on here, which, if we ignore, you know it might eventually hit our bottom line, our profits. So you know, it is a beneficial aspect as well, as it may incline the multinationals to actually themselves review their own practices and in a way improve things for the third world as well. Importantly, shopping choices alone were not considered to be the solution to tackling problems of trade justice. A member of his co-op party explained that you never replace government aid, a government negotiation or multinational agreement to support places. I mean, we're taking basically places like Africa and South America, and you could never replace those things with fair trade. But it obviously does help individuals, and also we come back to the fact of people doing something personally to help and handing money over to an organisation that's trying to do something. The majority of fair trade supporters do not limit their activities to only buying fair trade goods, but also engage in a number of additional campaign activities, such as being a member of the Oxfam or the Trade Justice Movement, writing to politicians, or being involved in local campaign events. On the other hand, non-fair trade supporters were more sceptical about the fair trade movement's claims and were less likely to believe that, as a consumer, they could make a difference in the following exchange from one of the focus groups. Notice why Stephen thinks that he cannot make a difference as an individual. Fair trade, talking about fair trade policy, which is to do with conservatives. Stephen, the money doesn't filter down because it's come into the country, and the government will say, that's the problem. You'll get like Mugag, obviously, who just runs their country, and all the money just rises to him, basically. Jesse, that's right. Michael, yes, his empire, still going up and up. Stephen says, if the government can't make a difference, then what difference can we make? That's the way you see it. As an individual, Stephen does not feel empowered as a consumer of transnational corporations, nor does he accept that he has the ability to tackle the problem of poverty in the developing world. Non-fair trade supporters' consumption was often utility tied to other personal commitments and practices, such as parentage, for example, rather than taking up responsibility as a citizenship consumer, as suggested in 2.1. They tended to argue that the consumption could not be expected to bear the level of responsibility that a fair trade movement placed upon it in many cases. It calls for some organised body, generally either supermarket or government, to act in order to improve the conditions for workers. Hazel, but it is down to us to do the fair trade, or it is down to government to insist on fair trade companies. Linda says, yes, if people don't know about it, then obviously no one's educated enough about buying it. Because considering that, not a lot of us knew about it, and we're just a handful of us. You know what does everybody else not know about it? But why should two different chocolate bars, 50 to 75% exactly the same? One's fair trade and the other one isn't. No, it isn't down to us to decide what's fair trade or shouldn't. It's just somebody else deciding it, that we shouldn't do fair trade. It shouldn't be down to consumer. It should be up to the government to do fair trade with our country, not us buying kind of chocolate over another. Increasingly, there's a parallel here between the attitudes of fair trade and non-fair trade supporters towards the role of the government in alleviation of poverty. In developing the world, both call for greater government intervention and policy changes, but more fair trade supporters believe in the amalgamated impact of their purchase will send a message to their that will become a catalyst for the greater political change. Non-fair trade supporters argue that governments and big businesses ought to act regardless of their preference for one type of chocolate over another. Activity 6. According to Wheeler's study, do consumers believe they have power to make difference to poverty through their shopping choices? In the discussion, the degree to which consumers believe they can make a difference through their shopping varies depending on their values and existing commitments. Those who are committed to a fair trade movement do believe their collective shopping choices make a difference, both to fair trade producers and by sending a message to large corporations and governments that needs to be done to ensure trade justice. Those who are less committed to the movement are sceptical about the impact on individual choices and tend to reject the idea of consumer power. Instead, calling for more action to be taken by corporations and governments. The government of the citizenship consumer. Numerous studies of the ethical consumption have faced a paradox. On the one hand, consumers profess to care about fair working conditions for producers, but on the other hand, only a small percentage of these consumers regularly buy ethical goods. In their study of ethical consumption in the UK, Malpass offer a scandalous suggestion to deal with their persistent findings that consumers reject or make excuses for not organising their consumption in a sustainable way. They suggest that rather than hear their rejections as excuses for consumers, we should listen to them as statements from systems who are certain finite limits to how much they are individuals and can be expected to be responsible for. Shopping is a complex of practice that is already influenced by a number of social, economic and cultural constraints, including price, taste, preference and availability. Consumers such as Ada recognise their limits to how much they can achieve through their shopping choices and expect some other institutions to intervene to ensure that trade justice is achieved. Owing to early successes of fair trade movements in the UK, all the other major supermarkets now offer fair trade certified products. In 2006, Sainsbury's switched to selling fair trade only bananas in 2007. They announced their decision to switch up their own brand coffee and tea. Fair trade only lines in 2009, the nation's favourite chocolate bar. Cadbury's Dairy Milk became fair trade certified. Sainsbury's scales of fair trade goods accounted for 1/3 of all fair trade retail sales in the UK in 2008. And the switch by Cadbury tripled the sales of fair trade cocoa. The growth of fair trade sales is also influenced by an overgrowing network of fair trade towns, as well as fair trade schools, universities, churches and workplaces, whose key aim is to encourage local councils, municipalities, businesses and retail outlets to make the switch to fair trade products, often by removing non-fair trade alternatives. Many people in the UK are now buying fair trade, not because they actively choose it, but because it is all that is available. In my study, many of non-fair trade supporters I spoke with have bought fair trade products in the most recent shopping visit, but they're unaware of it. The rise of the accidental fair trade consumer raises questions about fair trade consumption acts are understood as representative. Now consider that most fair trade goods are sold through supermarkets as have made the decision to shop fair trade only line. Do consumers have a choice to vote at all? You may think that removing the choice of non-fair trade goods from the shelf answers Hazel's call for someone else to take responsibility. However, fair trade movement as a broader political agenda beyond encouraging consumers to buy fair trade. The current number of fair trade purchases and uses in addiction indicates a level of support amongst the population for changes of international trading laws. Indeed, Charter of Fair Trade Principles states demand for fair trade products enables for fair trade organisations and others who adopt fair trade practices to extend the reach and impact of their work, as well as visible demonstrating and articulating public support for changes in international trade rules to governments and policymakers. The Adam Smith Institute had a problem with this, but what do you think? Given what you've learned about the fair trade movement in this section 1, should be the fair trade movement by counting their growing scales as votes from citizens, consumers supportive of their approach. In a summary, a boundary of positioning being seen between consumers and citizens with opposing identities in terms of level of civic engagement. The fair trade movement claims that growing fair trade sales signal consumers that are using the marketplace to vote for an alternative model of trade relations. Bridging that boundary, social science evidence helps us question and evaluate these claims, highlighting different levels of believing and opportunities for citizens and consumers to vote in the marketplace. I'll leave it there, ladies. After what's on that door. God bless. Take care. Have a good day.